appears in us with a pattern we are threading. There's a nearness and its gravity is echoing. Sister, what are you doing out here? You mustn't interrupt the incantation. You know this is Mother's time. What is it that cannot wait?
Six to one, Mother. Everything I've done for you.
Hello everyone, RFG here with a review for 1000xRESIST, a third-person adventure game with influences from visual novels and walking sims available on PC and Switch. It's developed by Sunset Visitor and published by Fellow Traveler. Even though the game has influences from visual novels and walking sims, that doesn't mean you'll mostly be watching a story unfold without much input, but it is something I want to point out. But before I get into that, I'll give you a small breakdown of the premise of the story. After an extraterrestrial species referred to as occupants arrive on Earth, humanity begins to die off from a deadly disease. A lone girl, Iris, is immune to this disease, and after 1,000 years has populated a bunker known as the Orchard with clones of herself. Iris, now referred to as the All-Mother, has left the Orchard and left it in charge to 6 lead clones along with their shell counterparts. She now waits at her own compound for worthy clones to assist her with the occupants. The 6 lead clones are known as Principal, Bang Bang Fire, Knower, Fixer, Healer, and the new Watcher, your main playable character. While the other lead clones have more conventional functions, such as prepping shells for defense, birthing new shells, or leading the Orchard, the Watcher is able to relive the memories of Iris, the All-Mother, to interpret her memories through communions with the help of an AI called Secretary. Soon after the intro, 1000xRESIST throws you into the prologue, and you'll briefly go through some of the main phases of the game. It shows you the visual novel influence of dialogue choices, and a slight glimpse of the adventure aspect while you're running through the Orchard and speaking to Watcher's clone sisters. I mentioned that despite 1000xRESIST's influence from visual novels and walking sims, that you wouldn't lack input in how you interact in the game. And Chapter 1 immediately puts you into the first communion phase, and begins to show you how. In your first few minutes in the communion, you'll be able to explore, speak to NPCs, and interact with objects. Secretary will hover over to items and characters to indicate that you can interact with them. If you forget your tasks, you can bring up a display that shows what tasks are currently active or completed. Completing your first 2 tasks unlocks an ability to zip in periods of time. This time frame varies depending on the circumstance and follows a narrative, meaning that sometimes you'll be given only 1 or 2 sequences to zip between, or you'll be given a series of them. Sometimes you'll be zipping between large gaps in time, or short ones. You can keep track of what sequence you're in or what sequences are available by looking over at the bottom left corner of the screen and trying to cycle between them. Communion phases will often give you puzzles that you'll have to solve by zipping through sequences by being in the right place and time. Sometimes you'll be going through many sequences in order to complete your tasks, and if you're locked out of being able to zip through a sequence, then that means your current task isn't complete. You'll also be introduced to these platform sections. These platform sections aren't usually timed or difficult, and come across more as light puzzles, as you're mostly looking to find the next check to jump to, and don't suffer any consequence besides losing your own time. Even though these sections can be simple, they can get a bit more complex. These sections are fairly linear, but provide a nice shift in gameplay that ends up progressing the story. When you're finally free to roam the Orchard, you'll see that you're granted a lot of freedom in moving around. Secretary will still indicate who or what you can interact with. You can speak to shells, your lead role clone sisters, and find more objects to interact with. Your map will be useful in navigating the layout, and you can bring up a waypoint display to help pinpoint interactable shells and your sisters, as characters can appear in different parts of the orchard. While you're pretty much given all the time you want to explore, your typical goal in the orchard sections of the game will be to meet a specific sister to enter a communion phase. All of these phases flow fairly naturally, and even though the game is primarily seen through a third-person perspective, the often used first-person view shifts fit from both a narrative and design sense. Like I mentioned, the game allows for a lot of player interaction, more than I'd expect from other games that would blend these genres together. But it is still a largely narrative-focused game. The overall story is well done, but Resist also presents a lot of complex themes into its story. While a lot of other games try to fit complexity and nuance into them, oftentimes it'll end up feeling ham-fisted or shoehorned in. But here, like many other parts of the narrative, these complex issues will be presented and then come into relevance later again in the story. Even phrases you'll hear throughout the game will be analyzed in-game, and then shown meaning at an appropriate time later. By the end of Resist, there's relatively little that gets forgotten or left out. Graphics are a different case. A lot of the backgrounds are very simple, which works for the most part. However, some areas show care in presentation through lighting and color. Its often eerie and haunting imagery leaves quite the impact. I've mentioned the clones based off of Iris, the All-Mother, but there are others. While the sisters, Shells, Jiao, a friend of Iris's before becoming the All-Mother, and the 50s, soldiers you see early on in the game, are detailed enough, many other NPCs are rather lacking or awkwardly animated. That being said, some of their dialogue will have meaning later on, but they can also kind of be ignored. And you'll often see how much detail is put into the more prominent characters in the game, and that shines through their individual personalities. One other thing to note about the characters is that they are all fully voiced, but there's no facial animation for lip syncing. I'm not sure if there is some type of technical limitation that prevented Sunset Visitor from attempting to create matching facial animations, as there are moments where characters do change their visual expressions, but it works in 1000x's favor and often comes across as a stylistic choice. That choice might have been a factor for the voice acting in general. Most of the dialogue is spoken in low tones or volume, which fits the atmosphere in terms of story and most of the characters. But there is a lot of range when the moments are appropriate. Although sometimes I felt that the soundtrack would drown out some of the dialogue, which isn't much of a problem.
Ah, you mean chrysanthemum. A personal favorite. A flower for long life. Should we add anything else?
The soundtrack itself is stellar, and you'll often find that it will match the events unfolding on screen. You'll often hear piano arrangements that match the sequences taking place in the past, or piano flourishes that help highlight the tenseness of situations happening presently. Other tracks fit for the sci-fi setting or mood in general. 1000xRESIST is a strong game. Its story and pacing, even after its intense intro, should keep you intrigued to want to keep progressing through. Its visual novel influence provides you plenty of choices to make you wonder if you made the right decision, while the exploration and other elements that involve interaction offer a unique experience that blends its genres together very well. It's very forgiving in that many parts of the game don't put a timer on player agency. Although some of the more superficial aspects aren't always top-notch, it makes up for that in many other ways. But that doesn't mean that 1000xRESIST is worth the play for all gamers. While the narrative and pacing itself is very strong, I can see that the lack of action won't work for all players. Even the adventure aspects are rather limited, in that you're mostly set to exploring the orchard, and there's not much to explore in the communion phases of the game. You are mostly moving in a linear direction, narratively speaking, and a lot of your choices don't have an impactful meaning. If story in video games is any kind of determining factor for you, then I strongly recommend 1000xRESIST, as it not only has one of the more well put together stories in recent years, but very few games have ever even kept a story this tightly written with complexity, meaning, and ties from its early moments to its late portions at this level. If story is something that can take a backseat while you want to casually explore environments, solve some minor puzzles, and do some very light platforming, I'd also recommend it to you. That's it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Thanks. Bye.